Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're not just analyzing information, we're analyzing it under extreme pressure. We're doing a deep dive into critical decision-making when the stakes are immediate, unforgiving, and quite literally airborne. Our source material today is just a masterclass pulling these essential lessons from the intense life-or-death world of aviation. And to really anchor this whole discussion, let's start with a fascinating and really high-stakes anecdote. There's a crew, they're aboard an A320, and they report a major problem in flight. They assess it as a failure of their elevator controls, the critical controls for pitch. So they follow their procedures, declare an emergency, and they successfully divert the flight. On the surface, that seems like a textbook application of training, right? It was an incredible execution of a plan, absolutely. But here is the crucial and honestly pretty unsettling twist that they discovered after landing. When investigators analyzed the data, specifically the post-flight report and the digital flight data recorder, the DFDR, the official record, completely contradicted what the crew reported. Wait, the DFDR? Just so we're all clear, that's the black box, right? Essentially the unbiased truth machine that records every single input and sensor reading.
Exactly. The DFDR is the cold, objective truth. And it revealed that the primary warning they thought they saw for an elevator fault was actually an aileron fault warning.
An aileron fault?
Yes. Aileron's control roll, not pitch. The fault was real, but the crew completely misperceived what it was.
That is genuinely shocking. So they solved a problem that they themselves had misdiagnosed, and in doing so, they were potentially missing the real issue entirely. How can highly trained professionals make such a fundamental mistake?
And that is the core vulnerability we're exploring today. For some reason, maybe it was a momentary lapse of attention, or perhaps they felt a slight, an unrelated nose-down tendency and confirmation bias just kicked in. They misidentified that initial data point, and that single moment illustrates perfectly why situation awareness, or SA, is the non-negotiable prerequisite for taking any kind of appropriate action. If the map in your head is wrong, you're flying blind, even if you execute the wrong plan perfectly.
Okay, let's unpack that critical prerequisite. Situation awareness. Our sources define SA as having a clear, accurate, and up-to-date understanding of what is going on around you. It's the pilot's, or really any critical leader's, constant updated operating picture.
Right, and this is where training and experience really pay off. SA allows pilots to rely on what we call mental templates. They try to recognize a new situation as an instance of a familiar or typical situation. If they can do that, the corresponding mental template is triggered, and they can bypass that long, structured decision analysis process. It saves precious, precious time.
Can you give us an example of a template like that?
Sure. A really good one is the ready for takeoff phase. The template dictates these key parameters you have to monitor, tower clearance, runway length, wind, engine power. But crucially, it also anticipates specific potential failures, like an engine failure right at rotation or a runway incursion. The template preloads the immediate reaction plan.
Okay, so the template is supposed to speed things up, but also protect against these kinds of basic misreads. So why didn't the A320 cruise system, their template, catch that it was an aileron fault? Doesn't that sound like a failing of the template system itself?
Well, that's the danger. A template is only as good as the input you give it. Their template was likely ready for a control failure, sure, but because their initial SA, their observation was flawed, mistaking the aileron for the elevator, their whole decision process was built on a foundation of sand. They started seeking evidence to confirm the elevator fault they thought they had, which made them completely miss the correct warning.
So they were looking for what they expected to see.
Precisely. And this brings us to the most vital countermeasure for flawed SA. To make sure you're assessing things properly, you have to consciously adopt a mindset of skepticism. You have to ask, can it be something else entirely? Or are we missing something here?
That's fantastic advice for any high-stakes scenario, not just aviation. So what happens when a situation is so complex or so unusual that there's no ready-made template that fits? That's when you have to shift gears, right?
That's exactly right. That's when you move to the formal, structured decision process. If there's no immediate recognition, you have to slow down to speed up later. The process is very structured. You assess the situation, you analyze the problem, collect information, and only then do you select a course of action from your alternatives. Under stress, that structure is your anchor.
And what goes into a good decision under that kind of pressure?
A robust decision needs three things, no matter how fast you have to make it. 1, clear and organized objectives. 2, considered alternative actions. And 3, anticipated potential consequences for each of those alternatives. If you skip any of those, you aren't really making a decision, you're just gambling.
What's so fascinating about aviation decisions is that they aren't static. I mean, they have an extremely limited lifespan because the dynamics of flight are always changing.
Yes, a choice that was optimal 30 seconds ago might now be lethal. And sometimes the decision is so critical, it's just inseparable from the action itself.
Like a go-around or a TCS alert.
Exactly. Think about a TCS advisory. That's the traffic collision avoidance system. It gives you a resolution advisory that forces a non-negotiable action climb or descend to avoid a mid-air collision.
You don't get to run a checklist.
No, the decision is the immediate action. And this raises a really important point: the severity. In aviation, every decision can have a major impact because of these dynamics, the interconnection of information, and, critically, the irreversibility of some actions.
There's no undo button.
Not at 30,000 feet.
So if the situation is unusual but it's clearly identified, let's say a massive fuel leak or a medical emergency forcing a diversion, and there's time for conscious evaluation, that's where mental simulation comes into play. Is that right?
Yes, mental simulation is where the crew mentally runs through the full consequences before they commit. They'll assess multiple options, returning to where they came from, continuing on, or landing at the nearest suitable airport. They're assessing feasibility, safety, and all the operational and commercial consequences. Fuel reserves, the weather, passenger comfort, even maintenance capability at the new airport.
But that simulation process has its own traps, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. One major danger is accepting the first solution that just seems viable without really testing it. We call this a premature termination of evidence search.
You stop looking for flaws the moment you find something that's just acceptable.
Exactly. You find something that works and you stop thinking.
That sounds suspiciously linked to a personality trait that comes up a lot in these scenarios. Impulsivity. That urge that says, I have to act, I have to do something right now.
It absolutely is. Impulsivity feeds right into that trap of premature termination. The urge to get the problem solved, to act, it overrides the need to thoroughly evaluate the options. If you rush the simulation because of that internal pressure, you are far more likely to pick an option that turns out to be inappropriate or even unimplementable later on.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The obstructions. We've established that great SA leads to better decisions, but what external and internal factors actively impair this whole process? Let's start with the crushing, unavoidable reality of time.
Time pressure is a critical factor because flying is so dynamic. But ironically, extreme focus on the immediate problem can sometimes lead pilots to lose time consciousness. They fall into this trap of believing they have plenty of time. But under genuine severe pressure, fewer options get considered, and often the first acceptable one is the one that's chosen.
And the definitive example of managing that severe time pressure has to be the Hudson accident, the miracle on the Hudson. From the moment the birds hit Flight 1549, the crew had only 208 seconds until they were in the water.
208 seconds. And our sources highlight that within about 1 minute of that bird strike, Captain Sullenberger and his first officer knew they couldn't consult the written guidance. They couldn't complete the appropriate engine failure checklists. The time constraints just made protocol impossible. They were forced to work almost entirely intuitively and collaboratively.
That demonstrates a terrifying pivot, doesn't it? The moment the structured process becomes impossible, the crew has to immediately switch to intuitive action, just drawing on decades of experience in mere seconds. If they had allowed stress to paralyze them or cause tunnel vision, they would have been lost.
And that ability to manage stress is what protects decision quality. Constraints like fatigue cause crews to ignore information. Stress favors short-term, immediate decisions, and a high workload just rapidly deteriorates the quality of any thoughtful analysis.
So let's pivot to the internal gremlins. Individual and group biases. These are the internal filters that twist reality. Focusing on that A320 scenario, these biases very likely drove that initial misdiagnosis.
Oh, you can almost see them at play. First, you have frequency bias. That's over or underestimating probability based solely on your own limited personal experience. If a pilot has only ever seen one type of control failure, they might assume this new failure is the same one.
Right. And then there's familiarity bias, which is choosing the most familiar solution, even if it's not the best one for the current problem. We all kind of gravitate toward what's comfortable when the heat is on.
And the one most relevant to the A320 situation is probably conformity bias. That's the tendency to actively seek out data that supports our initial decision rather than data that contradicts it.
So if the A320 crew believed they had an elevator problem,
They were subconsciously seeking confirmation for that belief on the dashboard, making them effectively blind to the objective aileron warning light that was staring them in the face.
and these biases just get amplified when you bring a second person into the cockpit. Even with just two people, groupthink biases start to emerge.
Yes. The most obvious is authority bias. The tendency for a junior pilot to just agree with the captain because of their rank, regardless of the merit of the plan. Or, on the flip side, the captain ignoring crucial input from the co-pilot because they feel they have to demonstrate leadership.
And that blends right into group conformity bias, where
Yeah.
the social dynamic just overrides critical thinking.
It does. You might have two highly capable individuals, but if the captain sets the tone for the diagnosis, the co-pilot might be hesitant to voice an alternate idea, especially if that initial idea seems, plausible. Flawed collective essay is often a result of poor social dynamics, not poor training.
So what does this all mean for us? We've talked about the two main pitfalls: managing the crushing dynamics of time pressure and battling the insidious nature of human biases.
I think we have to reinforce the conclusion here. Situation awareness is the absolute key. Without it, your decisions are just wasted action. And a sound decision must include objectives, it must include considered alternative and anticipated consequences, and we have to consciously manage that internal pressure of stress and the external pressure of time to avoid rushing.
We also have to acknowledge the role of personality, which we touched on with impulsivity. Our sources note other traits that actively impair decisions, like invulnerability, that thought that it won't happen to me. It fosters complacency and poor risk assessment before an emergency even begins.
And you can't fundamentally change your personality in the cockpit, but the sources are very clear on this. Professionals must be fully aware of their natural trends and weaknesses, like a tendency toward impulsivity or overconfidence, to manage the decision process. Knowing your own blind spots is half the battle in aviation, and it's half the battle in life.
And if we connect this all back to the bigger picture, the ability to manage severe time pressure in an irreversible situation like the Hudson landing, it required more than just skill. It required knowing yourself and working intuitively with others. So this raises an important question for you, the listener. If the stakes are literally life and death for a pilot to pause, acknowledge, and manage their own biases and personality traits, how often do we truly pause in our lower stakes daily lives? Before sending that impulsive email or making that snap organizational choice, to acknowledge and manage our own personality tendencies before we make a less than optimal choice.
That's something worth running a mental simulation on.
Indeed. Until our next deep dive, stay informed.